What brings you out to Northern Alberta?
Well, what takes me all over the world now, the gospel of Jesus Christ. I surrendered my life to Jesus when I was 38 years old, which will be 20 years ago this coming March, next month. And over the process of the next few years, as I grew in my relationship with God, it became evident that He was moving me from wrestling to evangelism. And I stepped out, got saved in '92, but I actually stepped out full-time into the ministry in the year 2000. And so since then, I've been traveling all over the United States and Canada, and in foreign countries, doing what evangelists do, sharing the gospel. Back in 2006, I was invited to do an event for Promise Keepers Canada in Regina, and as a result of that event, I've now been doing Promise Keepers meetings all over the country ever since. And so I tell people I've probably seen more of Canada than most Canadians now in the last 6 years. And it just seems like that God has moved me in the direction of if I was going to have a specific ministry to someone, it seems it's men. I keep getting put in front of men. I'm very popular in prison.
Right.
Guys in prison watch a lot of television. They love soap operas, and of course wrestling is a soap opera.
So how does your message to men different than a general audience?
I just, when I address men, I address the specific issues that men face, and of course those are the issues that I dealt with. Pride, ego, most men chase after the world and all that the world has to offer. And I'm, in its simplest form, I'm there to say, look, I've been there and done that. I've had all the stuff you think is going to make you so happy, and it's not. And that gets into being a good husband, being a good father. We have a nation of fatherless children growing up. God called on men to lead. God called on men to be before the breadwinner. They're to be the priest in their home. It's not a woman's obligation to have the kids in church on Sunday. It's the man's. And I confront them with that. So you might say I'm still a wrestler, but I got the greatest tag team partner in the world now, in the universe, Jesus.
It's funny, I know that I was a teenager once too. And when kids get to be teenagers, all of a sudden they come to think that their parents don't know anything. And I had one to do with my own teenagers. And there were times when I just wanted to grab them and shake them and go, hey, look, you little moron. You think you're so smart. I said, I've got 20 or 30 years of life experience on you now. I've already thought about what you're thinking. I've already tried what you're talking about. And I'm not giving you boundaries and rules because I want to be a killjoy. I'm giving you those boundaries and rules because I love you and I'm trying to protect you.
The industry seems to have changed a lot in recent years. What do you make of wrestling today compared to when you were involved in it? Is it much different in your views?
Well, it's different in a lot of ways. It's a lot more drama than wrestling. It's a lot of fans say that there's a lot more showbiz, and the characters aren't as good, and wrestling's not as good, and there's a reason for that. The way that the guys that are in the industry, they don't have the ability or the opportunity to learn the industry the way I did. When I started wrestling, it was very regional. In Canada, there was Stampede Wrestling. There was another promotion in Toronto. There was another promotion in Montreal. There was another promotion, in Newfoundland. And if you went to any one of those areas, you could go to another area and they'd never heard of you before. You weren't known nationally, so you would go regionally, place to place, and you learn this trade. It's an acquired skill, kind of like an apprenticeship, and you get in the ring every night, and we'd be in the ring with guys who were veterans, that could help us along. Now, when the WWF, or now when WWE got so big, all the farm system collapsed and went away. So they have a couple of schools, so it's just a lot harder. But the good news is, in terms of programming, the WWE went through an era that they called their Attitude Era, which I was very outspoken about. I didn't like it at all. You know, it was pretty sleazy, and I didn't waste any time telling them or anybody else what I thought. But in the last 2 years, they've gone back to a totally PG-rated format. The atmosphere for the wrestlers is much better. I mean, when I was wrestling, it was the next town, the next show, the next party. You know, just like the rock and roll scene, drugs, sex, and rock and roll, and that's what it was. And it almost ruined my life. But today, they have probably the most stringent drug testing policy of anybody, the 3-strike rule.
You know, there's two kinds of friends. There's a real friend and there's what I call a fair weather friend. The fair weather friend is the friend that's only around when it's advantageous for them. There's something in it for them. It's like the guy who provides all the beer and the drugs and the stuff at those parties. You know, when all that stuff's gone, well, guess what? That friend is gone too. I don't want friends like that. And I'm going to tell you something. It takes absolutely no guts at all to follow the crowd and do what everybody else is doing.
So you played the bad guy, a really important role in wrestling, but you think looking back on that character, was there any kind of positive within that character? Or was it just the bad guy?
No, I mean, the $1 Million Man character basically is the essence of worldliness. The $1 Million Man is everything that God wouldn't want you to be. But he was a character, and in playing that character, it was my job ultimately to get beat. And that's another thing that back in those days, and you're seeing it more again now because the WWE's gone back to family programming, but there was a, you know, the lines between good and evil got blurred, you know, but I was a bad guy, everybody knew it, and being a bad guy, ultimately Hulk Hogan or Macho Man Randy Savage or Bret Hart or one of those good guys was going to, you know, kick my tail. And as long as we're telling the story that way, and as long as we're not glorifying evil, then we're telling the right story. My first WrestleMania, obviously, was a huge event because it was the one that really put my character and my name out there. And even, I guess before that, the first major main event of my life, I wrestled a guy named Harley Race, who was the world champion at the time in St. Louis at the Kiel Auditorium. It was the first time I wrestled to a sellout crowd in a main event. And St. Louis was a city at the time where if you made it there, then the whole world was going to hear about you. And that kind of put me on the map. That was even before the WWF. And then my favorite WrestleMania was in Toronto at WrestleMania 6, and I wrestled Jake the Snake. And it was just it was the second largest crowd I ever wrestled in front of. I think it was 67,000 people, and you know, I enjoyed wrestling Jake because he was very good. And then I guess the other event would be 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium against the Road Warriors. So those were pretty big moments.
Oh yeah. Is it hard to change from doing that to coming to churches like this? Or?
No, not at all. People ask me all the time, they said, do you miss it? I said, no. I said, you know, when I would miss it is if I see two guys that I think have a lot of talent and a lot of potential, and they're having what I call a good match. You know, sometimes it's like, I wish I could get in there, and sometimes that's watching my own son. I wish I could get in there and work with them because I could help them. But other than that, I mean, I had a career that's, you know, was 19 years, and, you know, I have knees that need to be replaced. I've got a bad shoulder. I've had 2 operations on my neck, and my body is, you know, I don't miss it at all. And I'll be quite frank. I've wrestled in front of 80,000 people. That's a big thrill. But to see one person walk down that aisle and surrender their life to Jesus Christ has given me more satisfaction than anything I ever did in my life.